Thank you so much for joining me. For those of you watching, my name is Jess. I'm a feminist marketer and writer, and I'm also thrilled to be working with Dr. Robyne, but in this capacity, I'm thrilled to be speaking to you today about your book. So I was hoping that you could actually just tell everybody a little bit about your work and the work that you do before we dive into Calm Within the Storm.
Excellent. Yes. And hello to you, Jess. I'm thrilled for this time. I've been looking forward to it all week. So in terms of my work, I've had a pretty non-linear kind of trajectory in the labor market. I have been at the university in different roles for quite a while. It was about almost 2 years ago, though, I decided to actually pull back from the university. So now I'm only there in part-time capacity, because I really wanted to do more of this work. And this work being supporting persons in all different experiences, all different industry, all different walks of life, really exploring resiliency and wellness. So I do a lot of professional speaking. I develop programs, workshops, different types of sessions to really help people find that personal alignment so they can show up and continue and do that great work. So again, it's always nerve-wracking when you leave something relatively stable, like a university position. However, now I would say I'm kind of in the trenches, supporting persons on the front lines who are doing the good work.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And of course, I see the impact of your work just based on, the people whom interact and who are part of what I would consider an online community that you've been able to foster and build. And a lot of your messages really resonate with them, which is really great. So you've actually taken that work, those experiences, and you've written a book, which is what we're excited about and what we're really here to chat about today. So could you tell us about your book?
Sure. So the book actually is called Calm Within the Storm, Pathway to Everyday Resiliency. I got to work with a phenomenal publishing house out in the West Coast, Page 2, which is this brilliant little boutique publishing house run by two extraordinary women. They just have an amazing team. So they got me started, got my footing, and helped kind of shepherd me through this mysterious and marvelous thing of authorship. The book itself, what I really wanted to create was a book, Jess, that took theory and practice, but also personal story. As an educator, and I've been teaching for almost 20 years, I know that stories resonate. They're what really draws deep learning and comprehension. So I wanted to create this book that was those things all braided together. So research informed, but also practical. It's like, okay, that's what the theory says, Robyne, but how do I put that into practice? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to give people strategies, but then I also, in my most authentic self, wanted to share my own experiences and ebbs and flows with resiliency, because I think that that's what makes it resonate. And as you said, these messages are resonating with persons. And I think it's because it's sustainable, but it's also real. It's real and it's practical. So it's a book that brings that all into one place.
Totally. And I think, like you said, there people really respond differently to kind of this, like, you should do this versus here is my experience and let me share with you the tools that I've developed over the years, which I think is a really great part. So this isn't actually the first version of this story that you've written, though, correct?
You are absolutely correct. This was not my first go at authorship.
And did you want to talk a little bit about how this story lived before it is Calm Within the Storm as we know 100%. It now?
Yeah, Jess, I'm happy to share this part of the story. So I always felt, from my own lived experience, from the knowledge that I was holding, that there were lessons to be learned, that it almost at times felt as though I came upon messages and I really felt this pull that I needed to tell other people. Like I felt like this is information that I should not hold on to, in the sense that this will benefit others. However, as I was still working through some of the work, because again, I've experienced a lot of setbacks and challenges in my own life, I felt as though, okay, the way I could do this safely was to be able to create it as fiction. So almost a decade ago, I decided to sit down and write about mostly my adolescence, and really framed it around as, here's a story of a teenager who went really off the rails, both by her own doing, like self-selecting into some of the risk and the chaos, but also because of systems as well. So I thought, okay, I'm going to tell this brave story about this fictional character, which very much was my experience, my lived experience. So I put that all together, and I wrote it very quickly, and I presented it to multiple different publishing houses, and it was rejected by all of them. And the rejection was, no one would ever believe that a girl could go through that. No one would ever believe that the world would be that mean to a girl. No one would ever believe somebody could self-sabotage their world that badly. They're like, you have 5 or 6 different catastrophic events in this book for this one character. And they said, for this to be believable, Jess, maybe you could just land on one storyline. Land on one storyline. This is too complicated. It's too messy. And of course, I took that rejection as like, this is real world. Like, our lives are not these beautiful, fine-tuned plot lines. And then I realized, in that spirit of that rejection, I kind of had this moment where I was like, I wasn't ready to tell that story yet. And I wasn't ready to tell that story as mine yet, because those systems are still at play. Those systems that really quiet women's voice, that gaslight a lot of our experiences, those are still loud voices in many different sectors.
I remember the first time you telling me this, and what it really struck for me was this general theme in society of not believing women. Right. And so while this was a fiction book, it was, of course, largely based on your real lived experiences. And what does that say about how we, as a society, silence women's voices and their experiences, right?
Very much so. And Jess, where I also feel as though that point, you're absolutely correct. Where it's exacerbated is when we are partially responsible for getting ourselves into those situations, right? Where it was this kind of idea like, well, you got what you deserved if you put yourself in that situation. Where again, I wholeheartedly disagree with that messaging. I didn't ask to experience violent bullying. There wasn't, these aren't things that I signed up for. Did I contribute to it in some part of ways? Maybe. Absolutely. We have lessons to be learned, and, there's definitely growth, and there are parts of, I do have regrets. And, sometimes people will say things like, oh, no regrets. It's like, no, there are definitely other ways I could have handled that in my most generous self. So yeah, but you're absolutely right, especially if if it doesn't fit these plot lines that other people say women should follow, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that story.
Totally. It's very it echoes such a dominant narrative about individual responsibility versus system responsibility. Yes. And I want to touch a little bit on the last sentence that you said, what women should do. Yeah. Right? Very much the story that you presented is not what women should do. Yeah. But what does that say about the fiction that we're then presenting to women, to young women to read, right? Where it's a very one-tracked kind of storyline.
Very much so. And again, there's not a lot of examples where we have persons in fiction and literature that I've come upon anyway, that are as complex as we really actually are. Where, and I love years ago, I love the kind of that song, I think it was Amanda Marshall, I'm totally dating myself, where she's like, you can be a bitch and a lover, you can be the child and the daughter, like the mother. Like, I just love the fact that this encompasses the complexity that is the women's psyche, the human psyche, really. Whereas it's one of those things where often I'm coming upon knowledge where one thing has to preclude the other. Like, we can't be grateful and raging. Well, do you know what, some days we're going to feel a little ragey, and we're also going to be grateful, like that. There's such this idea that these emotions can't coexist in one person's world or one person's landscape. And one of the things that I really wanted to do, especially with this book, Jess, was to really shine a light on the fact that we are complex. And when we start practicing self-acceptance, when we start really honoring our authentic self, that's when we can actually have some pretty substantive transformations, both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And so you've written this fiction version of your story, which is not quite as fiction as the genre of book would have us believe. But then where did you feel you were ready to start rewriting and introducing your story again?
Yeah, so I feel as though there was this really substantive turning point when I started to take a risk with my employment, really. So when I took this risk and decided, okay, you know what, I do want to be an entrepreneur. I do want my freedom. I want space. I want agency. I appreciate so deeply the privileges I've been afforded by having like a full-time permanent position in the academy. Again, I'm very grateful for it, but I realized I didn't want to stay there. Like, it didn't feel as though I was being of service the way I wanted to be if I stayed there. So all of a sudden you kind of face one of these big things where it's like, oh my gosh, how grateful am I? I'm walking away from something that's guaranteed to try something bold. And I found that when I made that first step towards this idea of developing some skill sets as an entrepreneur, I feel as though that landscape, it welcomed me, Jess. It welcomed me so kindly. And again, the right people coming along our paths exactly when they need to. Martin and Farah from Speaker Spotlight, they really helped me get my footing with a place to amplify my voice. And then I realized when you saw it landing, when you're looking out in seas of, hundreds of people and they're nodding and they're just like, this is exactly what I needed to hear. That gave me that confidence. I felt really emboldened that I will go and try and find another way to tell this story. Now, the other thing that I can tell you for persons who want to explore a little bit of, self-authorship, like writing about your personal narrative, I realized that I had to ensure that I had come full circle with the certain parts of my own story that I chose to share in Calm. So what I mean by that is a lot of life that has happened that is not captured in Calm. I'm not ready to include that because I still have work to do. I still have work to do there. So I had to make sure that I had found my own resolution, my own healing, my own acceptance with the parts that I did choose to include. Because I don't think really, in terms of people protecting their own sense of self, I don't encourage people to put things out there that you haven't done the work on yet. Do the work. And then that way you can talk about it so freely. You can talk about it. People can ask you about it. People can, be curious about it, and you can talk about it very deeply. But I don't think if we haven't resolved some of our pieces, that stuff we might not want to put out there yet.
Absolutely. And so for you, you've chosen to share pieces of your story in Calm Within the Storm. So when you started speaking and when you started seeing the reactions and how your work was resonating with people, and you thought, okay, I'm ready to start exploring, sharing my story in a different format. What made you decide to go from fiction to nonfiction?
Yeah, great question. So for me, I think it was the fact that the information sharing that I was doing, it was as myself.
Mhm.
And there were places where I was sharing, and I feel as though I've been developing this idea of knowledge transfer, knowledge mobilization. I've been doing that in my teaching for the last 20 years, right? I remember teaching child development at the university while our babies were toddlers, and being like, okay, so this is what they say in the textbook. Okay, this is what it looks like when you actually have 3 children.
Yeah.
So I remember I would always bring in story to accompany the theory or the key concept that I wanted to teach about. So I already had a wee bit of that practice already. And one of the things, I recall so many students saying to me, like 10 years after the class, they say like, oh, Robyne, I still remember. I still remember when you told us about Ava, or I still remember about Jax and Hunter. So that really kind of helped me think about that. If I want to really support people exploring their personal resiliency and wellness, the most authentic way to do it is to braid in story. And one of the very kind pieces of feedback a colleague of mine shared with me years ago was, she said, you can take the research, the really complex, dense empirical evidence, and you can like translate it into a way that's accessible. She's like, that's your academic superpower, which I thought was, I never even thought of that before, but it was so kind of her to share that with me. So that's what I really wanted to do here, realizing it's like, okay, well, I can bring in the theory, and I wanted to make it accessible because I don't believe this knowledge should be within the walls of the bricks and mortar of post-secondary institutions. Like, people should be able to access what we know about resiliency, what we know about wellness, what we know about developing self-efficacy, showing up for our relationships. I didn't want that to only be reserved for the academy.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the most sort of thought changing things for me was when I was studying in the academy.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm studying about activism, but it's going to live in this written work, and it's not going to go beyond the walls or transcend beyond this graduate of women's studies program.
Yes.
And that was my turning point for like, okay, how do we use this work and bring it out into the real world,
Yeah.
so to speak. So I love that that's what's been a driving force between not just the book, but a lot of your work, is to be able to share that with people.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a little bit about your writing process? So
Yeah.
you've had the story, you've penned it in a different way. How did you decide, how was your writing process? How did you come to write,
Yeah.
this full book?
Okay, so I can tell you, this is like full hats off and salutations and greetings to my team at Page Two, because I didn't know where to even start. And so Martin from Speakers, he's very knowledgeable. He's been in these fields for decades. I asked him, I said, where does one go? And so he let me know about this very specific publishing house that he felt was very much in alignment with how I want to be in the world, what I would want to produce, and what they stand for. So first, kind of, I think what helped at the very beginning, Jess, was aligning myself with the right people who could mentor me, who could shepherd me through this. And I started every one of those meetings saying, I am the rookie in the room. Like, I literally am the rookie. You are the experts in publishing. You are the experts in authoring and bookship. Like, teach me. Like, I just came in with such an open heart and mind to like, teach me, how do you take what's in here and put it into a book? So the first practice was actually working with somebody to actually develop an outline, like a kind of a, what's this book about? What's the key idea? And I was able to work with a brilliant thinker in New York named Janet, and she was able to help me really like flush out what an outline could look like, and gave me so much direction. So before you even kind of start, I think it's so crucial to kind of think about who are the right people, and then think about like, what is that skeleton? What's that foundation look like? And Janet was like phenomenal. And then what happened is I had an opportunity to actually have a really good dialogue with the editor before I ever started writing, just to figure out, okay, like, what are big ideas? What do you want to accomplish in each chapter? what do you, and again, we really spent a lot of time about how do you want people to feel like when they embark on this knowledge, how do you want to get them there? And I very much said, I appreciate that people say I'm the expert in resiliency. Definitely I've lived it. I've definitely lived it in more ways than one, but I really feel like a shepherd or a guide. Like, I just want to walk with you. I don't want to be across the table from you. I literally want to walk beside you. And that's the tone that I tried to achieve with the writing. It's like, I'm somebody who's in your corner, and there's no judgment. I am not judging anybody on what they've experienced, but I will walk with you. And so then it became a matter of chapter by chapter, putting those kind of big ideas in place. And one of the kind of really lovely things that I've always done when I do any project, Jess, is I'm all about systems. So I wanted each chapter to have a system, and the writing was a system in itself. So at the time when I was exploring the writing, Jess, I was doing a ton of traveling. Like, I literally was in a different city, different area, different province, different country. And so before I would go, I would get in my mind ready that, okay, this trip, I'm going to get a really good dent in this chapter. So I, like, the whole time I would be preparing my like speech that I was going to deliver, the keynote that I would deliver, but I'd also know that, okay, like, I'll have 6 hours waiting at the airport. I'll have 10 hours alone in a hotel room. I'll have more time here. And I would already do a lot of thinking. So when it actually came time just to actually write, I had done so much thinking that when it was time to write, it literally was just, I got to put it on paper. I had already worked through a lot of those ideas. So I developed systems, which is really lovely in reflection of this book. Because I can actually tell you like where I was for which chapter. So that's how it got started, Jess. That was the writing process to get it started.
That's so great. I was actually going to ask, do you remember, which airports and which hotels you were in? And are there any particularly memorable pieces of that process or system for you where you were like, I can't believe this came to me here?
Yes, I remember actually. So I have so many. Everyone has its own little story, but one of the ones that kind of keeps top of mind was I was writing the chapter on belonging, and belonging is one of the pillars of my theory on resiliency. And I remember belonging felt like a beast to write because it's so complex. Like the notion of human belonging and psychological safety, like that's a doozy of a chapter. And I remember I was thinking about it in so many different ways, but I wasn't like really sure how to get started. And then I just happened to be going up to Thunder Bay, and I was doing a workshop. I was doing a talk and supporting some educators up there. And what was really interesting was I actually flew into Thunder Bay, Jess, but I actually was doing my work in a little community called Red Rock, which is about 2 hours north of Thunder Bay. So I remember like renting a vehicle at the airport and going to the hotel. And then the next morning I got up and I had to like drive 2 hours, and there was no GPS. I actually had a map. I remember,
Okay.
I had this map, and I remember what it felt like when all of a sudden there was no signal. Like I just felt so alone, like just raw alone. Like if something happened to me right now, I had no access to anything and didn't see another car, didn't see anything. So I'm in this really remote community. And as I'm in this sense of deep alone, I started thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to lean into feel safe right now? And then I started to think about all of the wild adventures my father, as a producer, he used to travel to Africa, to India, all over the world. And my father was just this world traveler. And I thought, oh, Red Rock, that would be fine. Like dad could do this, right? I just started thinking about my father and how many precarious places he had been. And then I started, thinking about just like, okay, well, he's not with me right now, but his lessons, his wisdom, his guidance is giving me a sense of psychological safety that Michael's daughter would be able to figure this out. She would be able to figure it out. So all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, that is empathetic attunement. Empathetic attunement is that deep connection we have with another human being that just is that foundation of belonging. So then I presented in Red Rock, drove back to Thunder Bay. I stopped at the Terry Fox Monument because I always just hold a moment of reverence because that spot is beautiful. Looked at the sleeping giant, and then I tucked myself into the corner of Starbucks in Thunder Bay because I had 8 hours to wait for my flight, Jess. So I literally tucked myself in the corner. I actually said to the barista, like, my flight's not for 8 hours. And she's like, darling, you just do whatever you want to do. So I
Starbucks
curled
is
up.
a place where we can go to build community in other ways.
Yeah, but I needed permission first. I'm like,
Yes.
I am going to loiter. I will eat and drink all day long, but like, can I just have this little corner? And then all of a sudden, it just, the words they just flooded onto my laptop. But it was that notion of that empathetic attunement. That was the first sentence in that chapter, which I had to experience feeling so alone on that highway up to Red Rock. And so when I look back at that chapter, I just love how, again, it just felt like the world says, okay, Robyne, you have a story to tell. This is the idea. We've been training you your whole life for this. Now put it on paper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So each chapter has a story like that, Jess, and there's like 14 chapters in the book.
Oh, that's so incredible. I'm sure as time goes on and you're able to speak more about the book to a number of audiences, I'm sure people are going to want to hear how some of that came up. I really love both the aspect that your dad and your stories are, you know, part of that, but that somebody who was at that presentation in Red Rock might read that chapter and think, oh my gosh, I'm part of this.
Yes.
Which I really love. I'd love to talk a little bit then about how you're feeling in terms of, how did you feel when you first held the book?
Yeah.
And how are you feeling now that the book is starting to make its way, you know, across the world, across Canada, North America?
Yeah. All right. So full disclosure, the finished copies of the book sat on our front porch for days. There literally was, so the printing, like the publisher arranged for the printer, and I have the books being printed at this amazing little print shop in Manitoba. So it's printed in Canada, which again, this is so important to me. So they sent cases of these books, and they literally were on my front porch for days. And the children would be like, oh, we'll bring them in for you, Mom. My husband was like, I'll carry them in. I'm like, I'm not ready.
Yeah.
Nope. And then all of a sudden I realized, like, and of course the children were like, okay, Mom, somebody might like take them. The pirate front door pirates are a thing. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, you know what? If somebody wants them more than I do, then that's fine. We'll just let that be. And so it took me a couple days before I finally was like, okay, I'm in the headspace to now go and open the book. And I had to psych myself up because I didn't know how I was going to feel. Mm-hmm. And then I realized I couldn't tell Jess how I wanted to feel versus how I thought I was supposed to feel. Mm-hmm. And I have been through so many life lessons where if I'm not careful, I fall into that trap of we're conditioned to do it a particular way. So I've seen other authors open their books and then they cry and they hold their book. I've seen authors, have these big celebrations. And I actually needed those few days to actually sit with myself and says, okay, Robyne, how do you want to do this? You don't have to do it how everyone else is doing it. How do you want to do it? And then the next day passed and I still didn't know yet. And then finally, on a Friday afternoon, after I'd spent a lovely afternoon with a dear friend who kind of said, it's totally Robyne that is still on your front porch. That is totally you. And it was so affirming, Jess, because it's somebody who knows me well, who said, yeah, that sounds about Robyne, right? Like I'm never in a rush to do certain things, because rushing has never really worked for me very well in my life. So I had that pause. We brought the book in, and I recall we put it on kind of the floor in the living room, and the children and I, we opened up the parcel. And my first response was, there you are, old friend. Mm-hmm. There you are. Um, it was as if like, even though it was the first time I held it, it was like, it felt like an old friend. It's like, there you are. I've
That
been waiting for you.
that's so incredible. Was there anyone you were particularly excited to share a copy with after you had had the time with your children and your family? Was there anyone after you took the time for yourself that you were like, I have to get this book into their hands right now?
Yes. So, so for people that know my family very well, I have a very, very close relationship with my dad, and that very much bore out of a traumatic event that we had to go through, losing my mother, and unfortunately, and again, interestingly, people always assume because I had this like catastrophic car accident when I was 16, so many people just assume that that was like the turning point, and then like my life was smooth sailing once I like had my bell rung. Like once I like kind of learned my lesson, it was like boom, okay, now you're good, now you're gonna drop your self-harm addiction, like boom. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like, yes, you had a catastrophic event and now you're okay. So I continued to struggle for many, many, many years. My recovery was like decades. It wasn't this quick, clean, all of a sudden now Robyne's all right. And one of the things I'm mindful of is that I lost my mother before she saw me land, before I actually got to a place where I found this alignment between my personality, my soul, my story, and my purpose.
Mhm.
She never got to see that. And having the opportunity to share this book with my dad,
Mhm.
and one of the reasons why it's so special and why I was so excited to share with my father is my father is the only knowledge holder that
Mhm.
knows my whole story. My father has been a witness to
Mhm.
my 41 years on this planet. He's the only one, Jess. So to share that with my father, where here I was sharing parts of these stories, parts of my recovery, parts of my learning, parts of myself as a scholar, as a supporter, as a researcher, all of these things. I was able to share it with the one person who had seen the whole story.
That's
And
so,
that was really special.
I was just gonna say that's so special.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, he must have been thrilled to be one of the first readers. Um, what just to kind of finish up now, I mean, we've covered sort of the beginnings of the
Yes.
story, what Calm Within the Storm is now. What is it you hope that readers take away from the book?
What I hope readers take away from this book is like a steadfast belief that they are okay,
Mhm.
and they're okay right now. They're going to be okay through the darkest of the darkest seasons of their lives, and they have the capacity to be okay on the other side of it. I want people to have that steadfast belief that come what may, I will be okay.
Excellent. Well, as someone who's currently making their way through the book, I feel very much like that message and that intention is landing. I want to thank you, Dr. Robyne, for taking the time today to chat with us about Calm Within the Storm and how it came to be. Calm Within the Storm releases on March 23rd. We're almost at the 1 week mark, which is really
Yes.
exciting, and it's available online and at retailers across Canada and the US. Thank you very much. Have a great day, Robyne.
Thank you so much. Just take good care.